Happy Halloween, everyone. As you can see, I've got my Blair Witch cosplay on. Speaking of which, I gotta say, I freaking love the Blair Witch Project. I don't really need to talk about the Blair Witch's influence. Okay, no, not that one. Just when I refer to Blair Witch... Okay, fine. Just know when I say Blair Witch, I'm not referring to this garbage. Blair Witch is a very special movie, and not just the fact that it's found footage, but how it handled the lore around itself. I'd say when the Blair Witch Project came out, it was more of a phenomena than just a movie. However, that phenomena could only keep its momentum going for so long. There was an attempt at branching out the franchise with books, comics, even a full-blown sequel, but none of this stuff really caught on, and it more or less fizzled out. Even modern attempts to cash in on the franchise really haven't panned out. There was that soft reboot in 2016, which there was some buzz around, but nothing really after it came out, and then the 2019 video game being the most modern piece of Blair Witch media. Speaking of which, when I mention the idea of a Blair Witch video game, most people are probably going to think of that 2019 game. But that doesn't mean it's gathered a lot of reverence. Sure, there was some hype around it when it first came out, but that, like most Blair Witch stuff that isn't the original movie, fizzled out pretty quick, and no one really talks about it anymore. The whole idea of running around with a camera in the woods or otherwise had been pretty much done to death in horror games by the time the Blair Witch 2019 game came out. So, ironically, basically recreating how the original Blair Witch Project was only ensuring that it didn't stand out that much. That being said, if the newest Blair Witch game could be considered somewhat irrelevant, the original Blair Witch Trilogy could be considered forgotten. And I do mean forgotten. This series has very little imprint on the internet. Most of what you're gonna find is reviews and articles when the games were actually being released. Any modern takes are basically just pointing out the mere existence of these games. Which, yeah, that makes sense. Games like Blair Witch 2019 are dime a dozen nowadays, but in 2000, no company was making a game like that. So it's a bit odd to see a game based off a movie where all that happens is some teens run around in the woods, let alone 3 of them. Everyone involved with this project reads like an obituary of defunct game companies. Gathering of developers, or God Games, were responsible for getting the whole thing underway. They were the ones to approach Haxan Films with the idea of making Blair Witch games. There isn't a whole lot of info out there about this, so I don't know if they approached them with the idea of making a trilogy, or if that's something they worked out. Regardless, Haxan gave the direction of each game being based off one aspect of the Blair Witch mythos. Volume 1 being based on the Rustin Parr murders, Volume 2 being the incident in Coffin Rock, and Volume 3 being about Elly Kedward, the Blair Witch herself. As far as I know, these games might be canon. I can't find a definite answer anywhere, probably more so due to a lack of interest more than anything else. Each game would be developed by a different studio using the Nocturne engine, and if you have no idea what Nocturne is, don't worry, we'll get to that. Terminal Reality, who created the Nocturne engine, would make the first game, Human Head Studios would make the second game, and finally Ritual would make the third and final game. Okay, with that all out of the way, let's actually get started with Volume 1, Rustin Parr.
You've been prepped and disarmed. Do you have anything to declare before execution, Dr. Holliday?
Wait, what?
No, I'm ready. Seems impressed.
Hold on, what's going on? And who are these people?
So check it out, it's like this.
Okay, I've just been informed that The Fast and the Furious is not scary enough for Halloween. So, do a little bit of this, and there we go.
So check it out, it's like this.
Remember when I mentioned the Nocturne engine like a minute ago? Well, its namesake is derived from the game Nocturne, Terminal Reality's previous title. That game followed the exploits of The Stranger. The Stranger works for Spook House, a secret government agency whose sole mission is to fight against the supernatural. Volume 1 uses Nocturne as a jumping-off point into the Blair Witch mythology. This is an exceedingly strange way to handle a licensed game, and I do believe this is the only example of a studio crossing over the events of their own game with the lore of a licensed property. But Al, I'm not complaining, because this setup actually works extremely well. I'm a big fan of Nocturne, but beyond that, Spook House's MO and the fact that the events of Nocturne take place around the same time as the Rustin Parr incident make it a perfect fit. Beyond that, science and logic versus the supernatural is always a cool dynamic to see. In most horror scenarios, you typically need to shed logic in order to survive, and characters that don't usually play a more antagonistic role to the main characters or serve as fodder for the monster in question.
Sounds so heartbroken.
Now, don't get rattled, Pam. There's a logical explanation for this.
Such as?
Well, you can't expect me to give it to you offhand. It stands to reason.
So are we finally ready to actually start playing? Yeah, no. If your eyes work, you may have noticed some rather glaring issues with the gameplay. It seems even when Nocturne originally came out, its engine was prone to a lot of bugs. But 23 years later, and they are manifesting themselves in different ways. All three of these games have their unique problems, but none so apparent as Volume 1. Namely being, I couldn't get it running on Windows 10 at all. The scant few guides for getting this game to run were no help. No matter what I did, it would load for a couple seconds, and then do nothing. Finally, I just ended up using a virtual machine. But the thing is, you can't actually full screen programs. They just run in a tiny box. So I had to upscale it, which makes the footage look a lot worse, and on top of that, it can only run in a window. But it was either that or no way of recording footage at all, so I really had no choice. Despite running this on Windows XP, other issues still manifest themselves. Any cloth will fly wildly around, and in most cutscenes, characters end up walking in a circle until they find their spot. This is actually sort of a fix from Nocturne, as if the characters got stuck in a cutscene, they would just walk in place until you skipped it. Despite this, in Nocturne, bug cutscenes didn't happen very often. I think it might be the frame rate being too high, but I'm not even sure if that's the reason. Jesus, finally, with all that out of the way, we can actually start. Unlike Nocturne, you play as Doc Holliday, who had a relatively small role in the previous game. Stranger makes it pretty clear he doesn't like dealing with ghosts.
Told police that he killed for an old woman ghost that lives in the woods. Well, that began the local recirculation of legends about the Blair Witch. I suppose I should have expected that reaction.
Yes, he doesn't like being sent anywhere he can't shoot something.
Although he'll back you up if you run into any quote-unquote real trouble. You gather your things and you're off to Burkittsville to investigate the Rustin Parr murders. If you need a refresher, Rustin Parr was the guy that kidnapped 8 children and murdered 7 of them, while he had one child, Kyle Brody, stand with his back turned in the corner. Your job is to get to the bottom of whether or not supernatural forces were involved and stop them if need be. This divides the game into 2 sections: investigating in the town and traversing the forest. This was the game developers' compromise on how to take the source material and make it more than just running around in the woods. I gotta say, I really like the look of Burkittsville. It has a very rustic quality, but also portrays a very dreary atmosphere, which is also reflected in the townspeople. Some display an almost chipper attitude, while others are still pretty understandably wrecked from the murders.
Have a look around, and come by anytime.
Just go away. Just go. Don't bother my family anymore, for God's sake. We've been through enough. Goodbye, Miss Holliday.
Most of the investigating just deals with talking to people and finding out what they know. Once you've completed all your tasks in town, Holliday will tell you she's ready to go into the woods. You then grab your weapons and then head off.
I'm ready to go into the woods now. I better take my gear with me.
And this is really the basic formula for the rest of the game. The woods might seem a little confusing at first, but once you've mapped out the area, it's actually pretty easy to navigate. In a nod to the movie, you'll occasionally be sent to pocket dimensions where you can't locate yourself on the map and you're seemingly going in circles.
It's not the same love. It's not the same love.
I've seen this be a point of contention in other reviews, but I like it a lot. It does a good job of making the forest itself seem like a malevolent force. And truth be told, these aren't actually that hard to get out of if you're paying attention. What might be a little jarring for some people is the controls. Similar to Resident Evil, it uses tank controls and fixed camera angles, but they are far more fluent. You move much faster than older Resident Evil games, and your turn speed is also much quicker. You don't really need to worry about aiming, as the game has a very aggressive lock-on feature. This also solves the problem of potentially running into any off-screen enemies, as your weapons are equipped with laser sights, making it very easy to tell when you're aiming at something off-screen. There's also a few improvements from the original Nocturne as well. You can run backwards, and there's now a quick turn. Really, if you've played any kind of old survival horror games, this is going to be no problem. But for anyone else, it might take a little getting used to. You were given a handful of weapons at the start of the game, and naturally you're going to be using them in these forest sections. The weapon pool may be small, but the game does a good job of having you constantly switch between them. You're given a pistol and a rifle for your standard weapons, and
It's the enhanced charged radiance emitter.
to dispatch ghost enemies. You're also given a cattle prod as a melee weapon, but it's next to useless. It seemingly only stuns your enemies and does no real damage. I'm assuming the developers did this because in Nocturne you can dispatch zombies pretty efficiently just by walking backwards and hitting them with a melee weapon. Maybe since they wanted ammo to be more scarce in this game, they didn't want you to be able to do that, so all the cattle prod ends up being is a contingency if you run out of ammo. But if you're smart, that won't end up happening. The enemy pool is small, but they're designed well enough that you need to change your approach to dealing with each of them, even if it's in small ways. Sometimes it's beneficial to run past enemies to conserve ammo, but this isn't always an option. The dogs, for example, are extremely quick and will never let up on chasing you, so it's easier to just dispatch them immediately. Truth be told, by the very end of the game, the combat does start to become a little tedious. But I think the developers knew this, as there's a greater focus on wrapping up the story than more so on continued fighting. I think if this game was any longer than it is, it would cross the line into overstaying its welcome. But it doesn't. I'm actually going to end my discussion here because I don't want to spoil the events of the game, because I would genuinely recommend it. It does a great job of tying into the Blair Witch mythos without stepping on the movie's toes. The gameplay, like Nocturne, is merely okay, but the atmosphere it portrays is second to none. It's very clear that Terminal Reality is very attuned to making a game like this. Something that can't really be said for the other two Blair Witch games. You have to understand that Human Head and Ritual made action games. The same year Blair Witch Volume 2 came out, Human Head released Rune, a Viking action game, and Ritual is probably best known for Sin, an FPS game. So making slower-paced horror games was not really in their wheelhouse. And I can only assume that the Nocturne engine was probably really fucking weird to use. So I feel pretty confident in saying that Volume 2 and 3 were not in good hands. Regardless, Volume 2 is centered around Coffin Rock, which is a point of interest in all three of these games, but also an important part of the movie. The game centers around the disappearance of Robin Weaver, and by that metric, it also includes the ritualistic killing of the search party looking for her. Unfortunately, it's not that interesting. After a strange vision and a disembodied voice,
"Your time is not up, soldier. I have need of you yet."
the player character has woken up with the case of the plot devices, namely in the form of amnesia.
I don't remember. I can't remember much of anything, to tell you the truth. I don't even know who I am.
He's found by Robin Weaver, who takes him to her grandmother's, who in turn nurses him back to health. She also dubs him as Lazarus because he can't remember his name due to the whole amnesia thing.
Well, we'll just have to call you something, I suppose. I can't just have you wandering around like the living dead. Well, that's it. You walked out of the woods like a dead man reborn, just like that fella from the Bible. Lazarus, his name was. It fits you, at least until we can figure out your real name.
Lazarus. Good a name as any, I guess.
In return for nursing Lazarus back to health, she asks that he saves her granddaughter, who at this point has gone missing. You're given a gun and told to test it out, and
October 23rd, 1863.
oh, god damn it.
My orders finally came
Yep,
in after
we
sitting
got
in that
flashback
damnable
sequences
hospital in
alright.
Washington, D.C.
This fleshes out the backstory of our main character, which I have to tell you now is
where I expected
basically
most
nothing.
little fighting.
You're a Civil War officer. You get sent into the woods, and your crew is picked off one by one until you succumb to your fate.
Private, I am your commanding officer, and I am ordering you to drop that rifle.
That's basically it. No deeper connection to the events of this game beyond the fact that you were resurrected by some mysterious entity. These parts are also annoying because you're fighting Confederate troops that can shoot you. The only way to avoid getting hit is to kill them before they can get a shot off, otherwise they will always hit you. Another weird thing about these sections is that you share a health bar with the present. Like, you'll get hurt in these flashback sections, and when you awaken from them, you'll have sustained the same amount of damage. I don't know if this is some kind of mistake or a limitation of the engine, but it just pays to keep your health topped off in these sections. I really think these flashback scenes were here just for padding, because they reuse the same environments. Which, if that is the case, that is pitiful. The average playtime for this game is 3.5 hours, and I think I even finished it in less time. Back to the present, we say goodbye to Grandma and make our way to town. We talk to the Doom search party and Peter Durant, who was in Volume 1.
This him?
Afternoon. You the gentleman staying out at the Weaver place? I'm Peter Durant. We heard you might be coming to town. You feeling better?
This is a good touch, as he explained to Holiday that he was there when everything went down and that he met Lazarus. Another nice touch is in Volume 1, he is fully invested in the paranormal, while here, before anything goes down, he's a skeptic.
There's even a legend about a witch out there. But even a silly superstition can add fuel to the fire.
He gives you an exposition dump about stuff you probably already know, which is nice because you were just subjected to an exposition dump in a flashback. Did I say nice? I meant it's bad. It's a bad thing. Durant finishes talking to you and you go on your merry way before running into Steuben.
You okay, boy? If I didn't know better, I'd say you'd seen a ghost.
Who are you?
The only somewhat interesting character in this game. A blind immigrant, he tells you he lives in the woods by himself, before Robin makes an appearance and he mysteriously runs off. As for interacting with other people and by proxy the story, this is pretty much it. You meet up with the search party once more and have one more encounter with Steuben, but the rest of the game is more or less a mad dash to the finish. Barring the flashbacks, of course, which don't actually progress the story at all. Centering a game that plays like this entirely around combat is such a terrible idea. Not to mention the combat is actually worse than the previous game. Lazarus is much slower than Doc Holliday, and the quick turn ability is no longer present. I'm assuming the reason for that is Human Head had to start development before they could use the newer engine with that feature. That being said, it's still sorely missed. And also, since this is the 1800s, there are no lasers for your guns. But this just makes it more difficult to tell what enemy you're shooting at, and when you're aiming at something off screen. There are also less weapons, which is nuts because Volume 1 had so few. There might as well be one, however, because you're going to be using the revolver for 90% of the game. 2 of the weapons are melee based, but most of the enemies move too quickly for you to use them without taking damage. You also get a cross, but you can't use it until most of the way through the game, which is strange because the developers have you use it to dispatch ghost children in this prologue encounter. Since you can't use the cross for most of the game, the developers just have you going around shooting ghosts. What sense does that make? Volume 1 goes to great lengths to show how you can dispatch specters and makes it a gameplay feature. Well, maybe these are different kinds of ghosts, and the children are immune to bullets. Nope, it has you fight them before you can use the cross as well. Why do this? Why limit your already puny weapon count so arbitrarily? Why make it so all of your combat encounters feel exactly the same? The only concession to this lack of variety is that you now have to reload, which I guess is something, but it's more annoying than anything else. So you make your way through the forest, blasting anything in sight, in the past and in the present. Like I said, you run into the search party again and ask them about Steuben, and they have no idea who he is.
Gentlemen know a man named Steuben who lives in these parts?
There's nobody living in Burkittsville by that name.
Are you sure? He lives out here in the woods. He's a blind immigrant.
I'm telling you, no one lives out in these woods, boy. Least of all some blind foreigner. We'd know about it.
Suspicious. You do run into Steuben again, and he's as mysterious as ever.
My other senses have more than compensated for my lack of sight.
Funny how I keep running into you.
Yes, well, you're not far from my home. Did you find the Viva girl?
No, not yet.
Anyway, I started blasting. Bang, bang.
We finally made it to Coffin Rock to stop the ritual. And oh my god, the search party is being sacrificed. And once you know, old Steuben's been helping. Oh, you silly sod, Steuben. Well, whatever. In order to stop the ritual, we gotta remove these ghosts from standing in front of rocks. Okay, well, in order to do that, we've got to place these items we've been collecting throughout the game in front of these kids. I don't really know how you discern what items go to which kid, but I just cycle through them until I get the right one. With the process interrupted, Lazarus takes the demon into himself instead of Robin. The demon turns Steuben into this thing, and he runs off. Well, after a short cave excursion, we find him again and fight him. One interesting thing here is that this is Parr's house, which is a nice touch to add to the mystery of that location. Well, we defeat Steuben by, what else, shooting him to death.
No, you don't know what you have done! No! No!
Wait, what is this?
Hush now. You're okay. You're in a place of healing. You. Calm yourself. You've been shot in the head. You must remain calm.
But...
It's all right now, Lieutenant. You're going to be just fine.
What? I don't really know what to make of this ending. I thought maybe they were trying to say that Robin's grandmother was the mysterious force influencing us, which very well may be the case, but that doesn't really explain why he's gone back in time to when he was initially shot. I don't know, maybe somebody could make something of this, but I feel like there isn't enough here to work with, and I don't really care too much. The story just isn't very interesting from the get-go. We basically know the gist of it already from the movie and the previous game. I suppose the context of the sacrifice search party being used to imbue a demon into Robin Weaver is new, but we already know that Lazarus will succeed and she will escape. Like I said earlier, the flashbacks don't really tell us anything either, so there's just nothing to grasp onto here. Oh god damn it, I still have a whole other game to play. Well, let's wrap this up with Blair Witch Volume 3, the Elly Kedward tale. When I initially played all these games, I like this one a lot more than Volume 2, but I was still left disappointed. This time around, however, I fucking despised it. Let's just go over the basics first. 1786, and you play as Jonathan Pry, a witch hunter who has lost his faith in God. Despite this, he has been called to Blair Township in order to investigate mysterious circumstances involving the disappearance of children. After reviewing this section, I kind of neglected to mention that the whole setup of this game is the inciting incident of the Blair Witch legend. More or less, the reason I forgot to even write it in the script was because beyond this setup, it's not really relevant. Despite her name being in the title, Elly Kedward, or the Blair Witch's impact on this game is minimal at best. Upon arriving, he finds most of the townsfolk fleeing, and only a few have decided to stay. The town magistrate...
Our town has indeed been vexed by unexplainable occurrences. Several of the town's children have disappeared.
And the priest.
And a few nights later, I began hearing a voice beckoning me. Now I realized it was the witch. The voice was strange, garbled, but at the same time, gentle and alluring.
The magistrate has also jailed 2 suspects, the town drunk and a witch.
I'm guilty of nothing other than being in Elly Kedward's house.
The magistrate said you were behaving strangely.
Strangely? Yes. Would not anyone behave strangely after seeing the terrors I beheld?
Once you talk to everyone, you're pointed in the direction of Coffin Rock, where you find one of the children who disappeared. After fighting some zombies, you return to town with the girl. One thing I do like here is the magistrate. They position this character like he's going to be this thick-headed unbeliever the whole time.
But we have no need for the interference of outsiders.
Your children are disappearing. Your townsfolk are fleeing and speaking of witches and demons. And still you refuse my help?
The people can be forgiven for jumping to a supernatural conclusion.
But as soon as he sees the girl, he's like,
"That should be motherfucking witchcraft!"
He even gives you a gun. Good on you, dude. Beyond that, however, is the fact that you have more or less experienced 90% of what this game has to offer. Go to the woods somewhere, do something, come back to town to talk to somebody, rinse and repeat for a few hours, then you're done. It's like Ritual saw what Terminal Reality was doing with their game, and then merely pretended their game did that as well. There isn't any real investigation in town. You just solely talk to people, and they more or less just tell you your next objective in a long-winded fashion. Volume 1 also had the sense to split up the investigation sections and the forest sections, so you didn't have to tediously run back and forth. Not to mention, the woods in this game are a fucking joke. Most of the enemies you come across are zombies, but they're so easy to avoid there is no reason to fight them. Unlike Volume 1, where it was a tactical decision to run past enemies, here it's just to save time. Even if it were hard to maneuver through enemies, it still wouldn't provide a tactical choice. Enemies now drop health and ammo pickups on death. Like Human Head, Ritual has opted to make a straight-up action game. Again, making a game in this engine does not make sense without things like puzzle solving or conserving resources. But at the very least, Human Head was completely focused on linear combat encounters. Even the padding in that game is better, because at least you're doing something. Running back and forth is just so fucking boring. And what's worse is the unique combat encounters in this game aren't that bad. There's this focus on going to different planes of reality, and there's some very cool locales, even if you are just basically going in a straight line. And unlike the other 2 games, you're given a ton of weapons. Maybe even too many. In fact, I didn't end up using a lot of them because except for the guns, they all pull from a shared mana pool. In some cases, I literally forgot I had some of these, but they at the very least make combat a little more interesting. There's another thing that made this game far more painful than it should have been, and it's not really the game's fault. For whatever reason, pulling up the menu and loading screens take a dog's age on Windows 10. Nocturne also had this problem, but that game was actually fun, so I didn't mind as much. So also on top of running back and forth, I had to sit through long load times. Also, while this was rare, in some cases the game would break. And since I hadn't been saving a whole lot, just due to the relative ease of the game and how long it actually takes to save, this would end up sending me back a pretty decent way. And that isn't a fun feeling when all you've been doing for the past half an hour is run back and forth through the woods. In all honesty, there really isn't a whole lot to say about this game. You meet one more character, a Native American shaman who helps you out in various ways throughout the game, and he more or less reveals your main objective, which is saving all the children that disappeared. Eventually, you enter the demon plane to stop the evil at its source. Elizabeth, the witch in the jail who has been helping us the entire time, has you guided there via some kind of demon dog. Oh, he's stopping. Wait, what? Oh, Jesus!
You will never pass this gate, witch hunter. You thought I would help you on your quest, but I have merely led you to your doom.
You fight your way through the demon plane and save the final child. And once back, you come across Elizabeth.
The time has come for Lord Hecatomix to join with me. Your world will be brought to its knees to bow before the greatest ruler of all time.
I gotta say, I fucking love this twist. You have a game where a witch hunter is dealing with his biases, and this person who he normally would have killed has been helping him the entire time. But oops, she was evil, and I guess he was probably right about all those women he burned at the stake. Nothing to reevaluate here.
You were part of this all along? But I believed in your innocence. I trusted you.
Never trust a witch, you fool. Didn't you learn that long ago?
Apparently Ritual saw what Human Head was doing and they were like, oh, we can have an extremely silly looking vinyl boss as well. This fucking boss battle. God damn it, dude, this was the worst. I had it up to here with this entire game, and this shit just kicks a man while he's down. I have no mana left after the last fight, so I have to scramble to kill these zombies to try and get some. This fight wouldn't be so bad if she didn't shoot this fucking beam that completely immobilizes you and drains most of your health. I mean, look at this. This is bullshit. I keep trying to use the weapon that immobilizes your target, but for some reason it just won't work. I don't know if the boss is doing this or what, but it just keeps getting me killed. I don't know if the fact that I'm glowing orange has anything to do with it. I just don't know what's going on at all. I can't even target her effectively because the game keeps auto-aiming at the zombies. All the bosses in this entire game have had a spread out arena, so why would you put the hardest one in the smallest area? Oh, and the problem with the load times. Every time I die, I have to wait for like a minute for this shit to load. That might not seem like a long time, but constantly having to do this wears on you quickly. I'm gonna beat this bitch if it's the last thing I do. Wait, what? What happened? She just died instantly. On further examination, I think this is what happened. I killed this zombie here, he explodes into gibs, and one of those gibs hits the boss, which I guess killed her instantly for some reason. I gotta say one thing. Thank fucking God. Maybe the game sensed how pissed I was getting and it threw me a bone. Well, they burn her body, and Parr, who's completely regained his faith, is off to murder more women. What a happy ending. So that was the Blair Witch Trilogy. Overall, a pretty bizarre release strategy, but you know, I kind of get it. Clearly, they were trying to strike while the iron was hot, and if, you know, with hindsight, that was probably a pretty good idea. You know, if they waited to make some big game, they probably would have, you know, missed their opportunity to make any money. So, in a way, it kind of made sense to make 3 smaller things. You know, each of these were released for $20 each, so, you know, if you bought all 3, it'd technically be $60. And that only kind of sort of panned out. See, this game, you know, first one, did pretty well. It sold 50,000 copies. Second game, however, well, that only sold 16. And third game, well, I couldn't find any numbers, but I can only assume it did worse. I was pretty harsh on these two, and granted, they are not very good games, and I've already played through them once, so my patience for them was at an all-time low, but I still think they're neat. That being said, I really wish Terminal Reality was given a bigger scope to make this one, and, you know, instead of having 3 games, we could have had a fairly decent sized one for $40, and, you know, that probably would have made them more money in the long run too. But you know what, at the end of the day, they did what they did, and considering it's extremely bizarre that these came out at all, I'm happy to have even one good game out of this. Well, I'd like to thank you guys for watching, and I hope you have a happy Halloween. But if you excuse me, I gotta go film a documentary for my college thesis.
God damn it. What am I, an idiot? Why did I pick this? God damn it, I'm dumb. Wait, I think there's a house over there. Oh. Oh!